Strong Enough merch is now available. Go to strongenoughpod.com and see all the things that you can get to show your strong enough pride, as well as remind people and yourself that you are strong enough and you are worth it. Welcome to the Strong Enough Podcast, where we talk about the challenges and celebrate the triumphs of people just like you. I'm your host, Claudia. Today's guest is going to talk about her own experience with domestic violence. She's going to share what it took for her to get to a healthy space and why it's so important for her to now help others do the same. Please help me welcome Sam Biafore. Sam, how are you doing this morning?
I'm so well. How are you?
I am well also. I know it won't be when people listen to this, but it is Friday, and I'm excited about that. And I am excited to chat with you today.
Same here.
Well, to start our chat, I would love it if you would tell the audience a little about yourself.
Sure. Well, again, my name is Sam. I am a domestic violence survivor and advocate. And I know you and I connected because of that. But I'm here really to share my story and to share a little bit about, what I'm doing to help other domestic violence survivors and victims that are going through at the moment. But just, excited to be able to really share what's coming up for me and how I can go about helping. Maybe a little bit as far as my course that I'm creating that will help you to really be able to center yourself and learn how to meditate and get out of that headspace and those thoughts and fears.
Meditating is so difficult for me. Do you
Right.
find that's true for a lot of people, or am I just the weirdo in the room?
No, you know what? When I started meditating, it was so hard for me. And I think it's because I have that get up and go personality. I really like to be on the move. So sitting still is just, even to this day, it is very difficult. I have to get into that headspace. And it doesn't always come naturally to me. I have to really practice at it. So you're definitely not the weirdo in the room. For sure. Still to this day, years later, it can be a difficult task for me, but I also know how I feel on the other end. I know that I feel relaxed and calm and centered, and I know what is meant for me in that moment, right? What I asked for during that meditation.
I love that. So I will reluctantly get back into it. I will continue to try.
Even just a couple of minutes, it really can help, and just start small.
That I can do. Well, I would love to back up a little bit and talk, a little bit about your personal story. What was it for you the moment that you knew that you were not in a safe space in your relationship?
Well, I think if I'm being honest, I knew really early on, right? But, I was young at the time when I started in, this relationship. I was 25, and I'm a big believer that 25 and under, we are not fully developed and we do not know fully how to listen to our gut. So I think for me, I was looking for someone who I thought could give it all to me, right? And being, a lot of times in a domestic violence relationship, the other person has narcissistic behaviors, right? So there was a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde kind of inside. So when we met, it was so charming and it was amazing and it all sounded so wonderful. And then once he realized that he had me hooked in, everything started to change. And I thought, well, I can change him. I'm young. I'm everything that he's claimed he wanted. I can do this. And I refused to listen to all the people that had come forward and said, hey, listen, here's my story. Here's what happened. And I didn't listen. I thought I could change. We got married very quickly. And then I ended up pregnant with my daughter. And I figured again, oh, a baby's going to change him. And of course it doesn't, right? So it's something that I had to learn really quickly, how I was going to be able to manage my emotions and protect myself in, fight or flight mode constantly. going back to your question, I knew really early on, but when I actually wanted to accept it, it was years and years later.
You know, I find it very common, and I don't ever like to stereotype, but
Mhm.
women in particular really believe that we can change the other person. And
For
we
sure.
go in as the savior and think that we can just turn it around.
Hmm.
Why do you think that we do that?
You know, I I think a lot of us have trauma from many, many ancestors ago, right? I'm a big believer that we carry on traditionally, right, from not only just our grandparents, but way, way back. And so I think that there's a long history of abuse in some way, shape, or form, at least within my own family. It may not necessarily be the typical domestic violence, what people think about, but when you think about our grandparents and great grandparents and going way, way back, abuse was so common, right? We didn't know any better. Now we have the tools and the resources. And I think for me, I'm a very empathetic person. I take on what other people, give out. So I have to make sure that I'm paying attention to who's in the room now, knowing what I know. But, going back to being 25 and young, um, I think I was very empathetic and I took on what he, quote unquote, needed. And so it was easy for me to kind of fall into that trap. And I think as women, we're built and born to take on the needs of what our family or our partner needs, right? So it's just easier to fall into that trap if you don't have the tools and the knowledge to know, okay, this isn't right, right? This feeling isn't right.
You said you saw the signs early
Mhm.
on, but you continued because of kind of what we just talked about.
Yeah.
What was the moment for you when you said, I can't, this is enough, and I've got to do something different?
Yeah, I think, well, first and foremost, I was in a relationship for, it wasn't that long that I was there when I left the first time. Statistics will say that, someone, of a domestic violence victim will leave on average about 7 times. I can't count the amount of times that I left. I know that it wasn't 7, but I moved out twice. I also, I obviously moved back in. Um, a lot of it was financial reasons, right? And that's part of how they keep you, is making sure that you don't have the money that you need or the job that you need to be able to move on. I think the breaking point for me was he had other children, has other children, and there were a lot of issues with the other children, and I knew that I was in a never-ending battle when I tried to stand up for myself and my daughter and our household, and just behaviors were allowed from the other children that were unsafe for us, that involved the police. And I learned in that instance, the police were actually called on me. And in trying to protect myself physically, mentally, emotionally, and our, 2, 3-year-old daughter, I fled the scene, right? Nothing actually happened besides yelling. But fleeing, the cop at the time said that because he couldn't get my statement, he believed the other side. So I went to jail. Well, how many times can I go through that? At some standpoint, that was the second time that I had to turn myself in. And it's not because of, wanting to hurt someone, it's to protect yourself. And so, when you cannot trust even the police because someone has to be taken in, that's when it says, okay, I'm out. I can't live on a day by day moment of saying at any moment the police can be called and I might lose my job because I'm hauled off the jail, or now I'm going to have a record when it shouldn't be that way. So it was that turning point that said, okay, we're done, we're out. I have to figure this out, and I have to get out.
You know, I understand as a former police officer kind of why the laws in a lot of states are the way they are and say that
Hmm.
somebody has to go to jail if there's
Yep.
certain criteria that are met.
Yeah.
But we do see quite often that the true victim is the one
Mhm.
or both, end up going to jail. And so that just further traumatizes the victim
Yeah.
and makes them fearful of involving the police. So, what were you able to do after that to kind of say, no, I got this. I don't need the police. I can just move forward on my own?
Well, I don't know if it's necessarily something that just clicked. I think I just realized the pattern of how this was going to work, that calling the police wasn't going to make it better for me. It made it worse because even if I wasn't taken away or, even if they made him leave, it made him more angry. And it would make the situation worse once he came back home. So, I had to figure out how I was going to make enough money and I was going to be able to safely exit and get out. And again, going back to what you said about, traumatizing the victim, it wasn't even about traumatizing me, right? Yes, of course, I was traumatized, but even my daughter, right? Having the police come was really scary. And worse, if I was taken away, then she's left crying and watching me being hauled away. And even at 2 or 3 years old, she has such vivid memories of some of the things that have happened to me. So, it was making sure that that didn't happen again.
I would love for you to talk a little bit about safely exiting because you
Mhm.
you put that word in there, and I think that is
Yeah,
so important that victims have an exit plan, but it has to be a safe exit plan, and especially when you
yeah,
have children involved.
yeah,
So, will you talk a little bit about the steps that you took to ensure
sure.
that you could safely exit the situation?
Yeah, I think, it's a hard topic because every state and everyone has different resources, right? At the time I was living in Delaware. Um, Shelters weren't an option for me because I had dogs and they were my safe space, right? So I wasn't willing to leave them behind because I knew that out of anger and out of that narcissistic personality, the dogs would have been let go on the street or they would have been given to a shelter themselves. So, I had to figure out how I was going to exit, which meant saving enough money and being able to obtain an apartment by myself. So I think, exiting safely is hard. There are, like in Florida, I have a wonderful shelter that's very close to us in Naples, and they help, so many women and children, and they have so many resources that actually, women can utilize. Again, for me, I had to make sure that I had enough money kind of squirreled away, got an apartment, and then, one day when he was working, I packed up a truck and I was out. I think the most common thing that I hear when people and, survivors and victims reach out to me that say, "Hey, here's what I'm going through. Can you help me?" Most of the time when victims are coming up with a plan, the plan seems great in that moment. And then that cycle of abuse just turns around, right? And their abuser says, "Oh, no, no, no. I love you. I'm going to change." So that plan just goes poof right out the window because now they don't need a plan anymore until that cycle starts again. They also feel that they should tell their abuser, "Oh, I'm thinking of leaving. You have to change." Well, that doesn't work because it makes them more angry. At least in my experience, it made him so much more angry, threats, or my stuff was thrown out. And again, it was, calling the cops. The whole situation just escalated. So, you know, again, exiting safely, you need to be able to lean on the people that you do trust. If you have family or friends that can help. The hardest part for me was once I was out, staying away, not letting those words of, "Oh, I'll change, you can come back, I'm so sorry," not allowing that cycle to perpetuate again because you're in such a fragile state. You can believe anything that they're going to say to you. And that's how we start that cycle of, exiting and coming back and continuing on. So, um, I encourage people to really look into the resources that they have to be able to get out safely. Um, and again, lean on resources like myself or like family and friends, shelters, because you it's not easy to do it alone.
So true. I wanna highlight a point that you made because I love my dog very, very much. I would not go anywhere without him either.
Mm,
And there's actually a pretty high percentage of victims who don't leave or
mhm.
stay longer than they should because they have nowhere to go with
Yep.
their pet. And they
Yep.
do fear the pet being harmed or
Mhm.
something like what you talked about. So I just want to say there are a lot of states that have shelters that are
Mhm.
pet friendly.
Yep.
And then some animal shelters will take pets temporarily for free. So
Yeah.
we're getting there when it comes to pets
Yep.
because it is that safe space a lot of times, and a victim just can't walk away from that. It's
Yeah.
almost like a child for some people.
Mhm.
So
Yep.
if you're in that situation and you have a pet, look for options because
Mhm.
a lot of places they do exist, or even like you said, family and friends, maybe somebody can
Yeah.
take that pet, but do what you can to not let that hinder your
Yep.
exit if necessary.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, and I completely agree. There's until I actually moved to Florida, I didn't know that there were shelters that took pets. So, it is such a great and valuable resource. And I have one dog who's a rescue. He's older, but still to this day, he will protect me, bar none. And I think that was part of not wanting to allow him to go somewhere else, right? Because that was my protection, if
Mhm.
nothing else. He was that safe zone. So, but you bring up such a good point. Do your research.
I want to talk a little bit about after leaving and
Mm,
kind of the steps that you started to take to heal because you'd been through so much trauma, you'd been through extra trauma with dealing, with the police and having to go to jail. So talk a little bit about what you started with on your path to healing.
yeah. So I was fortunate enough that when I moved away from Delaware, I moved down to Florida, and it's because I worked for Peloton. They had a store opening in Naples, and I raised my hand and was willing to do anything that it took to move. And, signed a deal with the devil to be able to move down here. He allowed that to happen, you know, got the paperwork that I needed. And I was willing to move with or without my daughter in the sense that I knew eventually she would end up back with me. But I knew that was the first step in us healing. So when we were allowed to move to Naples, a lot of the um, mental and emotional abuse still continued, right? It didn't stop until actually a couple of months ago. And it's been over 4 years that I've lived in Florida. So just because you're divorced or just because you move away, it doesn't mean that it all stops. You still have to take measures to continue to protect yourself. When we came down here, it was such an amazing feeling to be able to move about freely and not have somebody, coming over and watching if your car's in your driveway or, making constant phone calls. We had so many states of separation that alone allowed me to heal. But I think the biggest thing was, believe it or not, I was in Naples for about 6 months and then the pandemic hit. So it was just my daughter and I. And Peloton was fantastic in allowing us, even working in a store, to stay home for 6 months and kind of oversee some of the back end duties. So for us, I had to learn to meditate, right? I had to learn, and I didn't even know that that's necessarily what I was doing at first. It was more of centering myself and learning to take a few moments for me in those days. And I started to really feel and hear internally what was meant for me. And it just kind of evolved from there. And, um, after the pandemic was not after the pandemic, but about 6, 7 months in, I decided that, through meditating and figuring out really what was meant for me, that October of 2020, I came out with my story and I shared via LinkedIn, believe it or not. And then, of course, Instagram and Facebook and all that followed. But I got people from the company that, reached out and said, okay, this is important. Your story it's amazing what you've been through, and we're so lucky, to have you here, that you've made it right to this point. Um, it sparked this whole transition within my career because it allowed me to reach people in the company, and of course people just in general in the world, where sharing my story helped us to design time within the company for not a conference, but it was something during Domestic Violence Awareness Month in October, where I was able to lead conversations, right? And I was able to, really put myself out there in the company, and otherwise. Um, and that kind of just sparked the whole, continuing to heal, because I realized, hearing other people's stories, that I still had healing to do, right? It would trigger me. Um, During that time too, I met my now current husband, and, talk about total opposites, right? I mean, this is a man who is the most loving, kind, and caring person, doesn't have a bad bone in his body. And I think being able to meet someone like that and realize genuinely someone that loves and cares about me versus someone who, as a narcissist, only cares about themselves, it turned my whole world around. And through my time with my husband, we only got married a year ago, but during that time, I'm still healing to this day. I'm a big believer that I will continue to work on myself until my last dying day, because I want to help others, and there are triggers now that I never knew I had, things that come up, and I think it's because I'm in a safe space, right? I'm loved, I'm cared about. There are things that I never knew that, bothered me, or maybe things that are coming up from my past. And I don't say that in a way to scare anyone. I say that in a way that I know that I'm healing, because I can actually acknowledge all those fears and those triggers.
I think a lot of people do make that mistake where they think, well, I'm healed, everything's
Hmm.
great, I'm
Yeah.
I'm a year removed and I'm feeling good, and then
Yep.
something happens that kind of sends them tumbling, and then they feel like a failure. Well,
Hmm.
gosh, I wasn't healed, and did I even do anything good, and what's happening here? What do you think is the best way for somebody to understand that it is an ongoing process, and to cut themselves some slack and know that there maybe forever will be triggers or different things that happen that affect you in a negative way?
Yeah. Giving yourself some slack is, at least for me, that was huge, right? Because during that abusive relationship, I wasn't allowed to have any slack, right? I wasn't allowed to make a mistake. It was the end of the world if something like that happened. So, you know, giving myself slack is still a learning process, not being so hard on myself, learning to accept, me for who I am, that I have flaws, and, I'm going to make mistakes, and it's okay. And I think having my daughter has been the biggest, and best thing for me, because I have to be a role model for her. And I have to make sure that when I make a mistake, it's okay. We pick ourselves up and we move on. And I say the same for her as well. But yeah, it's none of that is easy, right? Of saying, okay, I have to heal. I think the biggest thing that has helped me is taking it day by day, right? Of taking it moment by moment. And I've learned that just because I have a bad moment or a setback, it doesn't mean that I've had a bad day. So, I could have a trigger first thing in the morning, I could have a trigger late at night. It shouldn't offset my entire day. And, learning to go to bed and say, okay, what were three amazing things that happened to me, or, that I did today? It could be the littlest thing, right? I got to sit in silence and had my coffee. That could be something amazing for me, or, being able to be a part of your podcast. I mean, it's one of those things where you take those moments and you say, okay, you know, maybe I had a bad interaction with, you know, my ex-husband. Okay. We don't let that take over, because I've also noticed and realized some of the physical things that happen to me when I have those bad moments, right? I get really cold. I stop eating. It's those perpetual things that I've learned to know what those even little triggers are or things that happen to me, and being able to reassess and say, okay, even if it's not meditation, even deep breaths of 4 counts in, holding 4 counts out, it helps your whole regulatory system so much, and it just changes the following moments for your day, for your week, moving on.
I want to talk a little bit about your job, not your
Yeah.
specific job, but the
Yeah.
fact that your company was so supportive of you.
Mm,
I know that there are now laws, and I think it's federal. I can't swear to that. But employers now have to give people time for things related to domestic violence. So going to court or going to a
yeah.
therapist and things like that. But your company went a step further, really,
Mm,
by embracing your story and what you went through and really making that a pivotal moment for them to inform others.
yeah.
How did that feel for you knowing, before you shared it that you were kind of like, well, they're either going to love it or I'm going to be jobless,
Yeah.
and getting to the point of, wow, like they really wrapped their arms around you.
Mm.
How impactful was that for you and for your healing process?
I mean, to be able to be recognized, right, just in general, was such a fantastic feeling to know, okay, first of all, I'm not alone, right? I know that there are so many others that they may not come forward, but this moment is going to impact them. And to be able, it took, quite some time to be able to get that conversation out there, but it happened, right? And it's an ongoing conversation. I think, we all have a lot of work to do as far as not just making it during Domestic Violence Awareness Month. This is a conversation that should be happening when it comes to our leaders, when it comes to our staff, and individual teams. Trauma affects us in our workplace, right? There's no way we spend so much time at work that what's going on at home, at some standpoint, you're going to bring into your job. So to be able to understand the behaviors and the why, because when I was going through in the thick of it and still involved trying to get out, if you said hello to me the wrong way, I burst into tears. Now, if you know me today, you know that I'm, one pretty tough bitch, but back then I could just, I burst into flames. I mean, I had so much tension and stress. So making this an ongoing conversation where it doesn't have to be heavy all the time, but to have a trauma informed system in place and learning to understand, employee retention would be better. Happiness in your culture would be so much better. So, I think, yes, Peloton did a great job. And I do want to say, I just left Peloton in May. I didn't want to, but our store had shut down. So, I hope one day my goal is to be able to work with Peloton, not for them, but work with them and to help build more trauma informed systems and be able to continue to teach the importance of domestic violence. Because again, everyone thinks, my thought of domestic violence when before I went through it was, oh, it's all physical. No, it's mental, it's emotional, it's financial, it's sexual. There's so many different ways to it. And, the impact and how the impact of domestic violence alone on you, obviously, but, within your job, you could help someone, find a safe exit, right? You could help someone just be lighter and be so much more aware, right, of what's going on and seeing the signs even within our own jobs. And I think it's so important to be able to have those systems in place.
Talk a little bit about what you're doing now to help other people recognize those signs and create a way for them to get out of the situation and move forward in a healthy way.
Yeah. So I right now there's a couple of things, and ways that we can help. The biggest thing that I have started to do is work with companies like Peloton, where, helping to add in trauma informed systems in place to be able to help their leaders and help, the people that are actually working for them have systems that they feel that they can talk about, what's going on at home, right? I know when I led a team, there was always an open door policy that if something is going on, you can say anything and everything and vent and be there, and it's not going to affect how you are when we're actually working, right? So it's helping companies to build a better culture, build those trauma informed systems and put them into place so that our employees feel that they have a safe space when they go to work. That's the first and foremost thing. And I think for a business to be able to bring on someone like myself, it allows the victims and the survivors to have those resources at no cost to them, right? But the employers are benefiting because they have better employee retention, they have a better culture, they see the difference in their workplace. On the flip side, if you don't have a company that's willing, to maybe build in a trauma informed system, there are other resources that I have. I've just built, my website. My company name is Survival Takes Strength. And so you can go onto my site and there's either a meditation course that will really help you to understand why you're feeling the way that you are and be able to help center yourself and get you to a point of positivity. And there's also other things like how I started, right? There's affirmations and journals that can help in little ways and help you in the way that you feel that you need, to heal. That's how I started. I started by listening to affirmations by Louise Hay. And I swear she saved my life. Being able to hear the things that she said and start to believe them about myself versus what I was actually being told, it changed the whole trajectory. And it's why I stand here today versus, ending my life as I thought I should have because I didn't feel that I was worth it.
In working with companies that you're dealing with now, are you getting any pushback from some of the people there that, like we talked about, think that, well, abuse is just physical, if somebody's just saying bad things to you, that's no big deal. What are you seeing in the culture of the places that you're working with?
Sure. So I think, it's important for me to work with certain companies, right? That has a culture that is very DEI focused, right? With diversity, equity, and inclusion. You have the basis there for a culture. To come in with a program like this that doesn't have a great culture or that kind of stands down to people bringing anything in from their home life into work, it doesn't work, right? We have to have a foundation of, we have a basis of culture, a true culture, not fun sock day, like real culture that's going to make a difference. So in the companies that I work with, I think, yes, there's always going to be a little bit of pushback to say, well, we don't need that, but that's where I come in to say, well, you do, and I can tell you being a leader myself and the experiences that I went through and also my team went through along with other teams, giving them those resources and allowing the people that push back to have true one-on-one time or maybe smaller group sessions has been so beneficial because teaching, yes, you can teach a conference into the mass. I have a workshop called Leading with Clarity, and it helps building effective resilience and strength and empowering your staff and the culture to be able to come forward, right? So I think, that workshop is fantastic for a very broad overview, but building that one-on-one time with the people that don't believe that this should be a thing, that's where the change really happens.
You threw something in there a moment ago and kind of said it and walked away from it. There was a moment that you felt like you shouldn't live anymore, you would be better off not here. We obviously know that's not true, but a lot of people do feel like that's their only option.
Mm,
As a police officer, I worked with a woman once who had shot herself. She survived, but she felt like that was the only choice that she had. And she did
yeah.
end up getting away. So that was a really cool moment to witness. But what in you reminded you that you are worth it and you do need to be here and your life has value?
Well, first and foremost, my daughter was the biggest driving force to that because I could not imagine her growing up without her mom, but let alone being left with the other parent who, you know, with narcissistic, personality. I knew that she wouldn't be cared for in the way that she needs to be cared for, right? And I didn't want the cycle of abuse to continue. That's been a huge driving force to me, is to make sure that the abuse stops here. It doesn't continue with her. Um, I think when I was going through everything, and even, if even today, I can be told that I'm a bad mom, that I'm a bad person, all the disgusting things that I have been called and probably still continue am called those things. I believed that for such a long time. Every little thing that I did wrong, I believed that it was all my fault. I was in constant fight or flight mode. As simple as listening to those affirmations, it fell upon me one day on Instagram. And I started listening to Louise Hay's affirmations and hearing that, I broke down into tears, thinking, okay, if this is a woman who, I don't know if you've ever heard of her, her affirmations, but she had such a tragic childhood and growing up and didn't actually make something of herself until she was, I believe, in her 40s, right? So if she could do this, well, why can't I? It's almost like the competitive side of me, like, well, wait, you did it, so why can't I? And it was starting so small to say, okay, just, listening to those affirmations for 5 minutes a day and taking it in and building that strength within myself, taking every piece of getting out one step at a time, not thinking of the end. It was thinking of, well, how can I save, an extra couple of dollars here? Or how can I, get out safely? And it was sucking up my pride and, letting go of the ego to say that I needed help. Um, and there are still moments today where, I still can get into a depressed state, but I don't feel the same, I need to end my life because this isn't worth it because I'm on the other side. It's learning to have those tools that can really help you to say, okay, if I'm worth it, I'm beautiful, I'm strong, I'm powerful, I'm resilient. And, again, my daughter being the driving force, being a good role model and now being out there in the public. It's so important to be that role model and to say, okay, you can do this, absolutely.
I absolutely love that as well. And I think everybody could use a good affirmation every now and then, whatever your
Mhm.
situation is.
Yeah.
Did you ever go to a therapist? Because that's a big hot topic that we have on here a lot. We have some
Yeah.
people that love therapy and others that will not go in any way, shape, or form. So, was that a part of your healing journey?
So for me, it has not been a part of my healing journey. I'm not against it. I do believe in therapy. I also believe that we need to find the right therapist. Right? So for, being a domestic violence survivor, if you have a therapist that doesn't understand your background, it can be quite challenging. And understanding the cycle of abuse, right? So I think I haven't personally done therapy. I tried once, and that the therapist, told me how much therapy I would need and how many years. And it just was, it's like, okay, well, no one wants to be told that you need, 10 years of therapy and all the things attached to it. So I, I believe that, my therapy is helping others and being able to talk about it, right? At first, when you start talking about what you've been through, it's really uncomfortable, and I had a lot of shame around it. Today, I have no shame in saying who I am. and standing up and saying, here's where I am today and here's how I got here. But my therapy has really been, again, being able to express my story and talk about it. And also, have those moments of quiet time in, meditative state, in just being able to sit in stillness and in silence is beyond therapeutic for me, it's been so helpful in my life.
We are going to turn now and talk about another type of therapy. So, ink therapy is one of my favorites personally.
I love it.
I do have on short sleeves today. I normally don't because it's freezing here. So I have a lot of tattoos. I can see that you have at least one tattoo, and I think there's more than that.
Oh, yeah.
I would love to hear about your most meaningful tattoo.
Wow, that's a good one. I have 9. I think I have 9. A lot of them are on my back. So it's so funny. People will come up and say, oh, can I read that? I'm like, sure. Because I can't tell you what it says, verbatim. I have a couple that are meaningful. Of course, we all have silly ones that we wish we could go back in time. I have my very first one on my wrist, and it says "Strong Enough to Break," and it's from my favorite band, and it's so meaningful because it was at the beginning of my domestic violence journey. Right, I didn't even know I was in this situation yet, and I had gotten it, but that's just so meaningful to me. But I also have one on my inner arm here, and it's really hard to read, but it's from my biological dad. It's something that he had written to me. He passed away a couple of years ago, and he had written it to me in a book, and it's in his writing, and it says, never lose sight of the true values that drive success and hold on to your dreams. And it's just so fitting for all that has happened and that I've been through. And this is the newest one. I'm dying to get another one. But that's my favorite. And I put it on my inner arm to be, close to my heart. So at any time that, I feel a little off, I can look down and, he's always there and with me.
You're dying to get another one. So what's next?
So I feel off balance, even though it's been years. I feel like, you kind of have to match and be equal. So on one, on my upper back, on kind of towards my shoulder, I want to be able to get a lion and, with flowers around it. Sunflowers are my favorite flower. So I have at least one sunflower in there, and a little bumblebee, because being that I've, my last name, we have a joke, my husband and I, about bees. So want to be able to get a bee, and he'll have a bee as well. But I got to find the right person. It's going to be a little bit bigger than I'm used to. So finding the right person to do it is key.
I have recommendations. So if you need them, you can,
for sure.
I can give you a travel, where you can take a vacation and get a tattoo, or you want to stay in Florida, we can make that work as well.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Sam, where can people find you? So if they want to hear more of your story, if they want to get involved in some of your courses or what you're sharing with the world, or if they just want to come hang out in Florida and soak up the sun, where can they find you?
Yeah. So we are based in Naples, Florida. All of my handles are my company names. So it's Survival Takes Strength. You can find me on Instagram, where, I post daily, and we'll start to post a lot of the different things that I'm selling. But also my website, which is survivaltakestrength.com. So you can find me there. My course is coming out soon. It'll be ready in about a week. And then, again, I have all the things that can help at such a minimal price, like the gratitude journals and the affirmations. It's easy and it's affordable, for people like you and I, right? Maybe when we were in the thick of it and struggling. So would love to connect. And again, if you're in Naples, would love to just say hi.
Excellent. Sam, I so appreciate you being here today and sharing your story. I know that you're going to connect with so many people, and I so appreciate all that you're doing to bring awareness to the masses. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on. This has been such an honor and a pleasure, and I'm so glad we got to chat.
Same. Thank you. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and follow us on social media so you'll never miss what's going on. Remember, until next week, you are strong enough, you are worth it. Thank you for listening to the Strong Enough podcast. You can find us on your favorite podcast platform by searching Strong Enough. And on YouTube, we're on the Spear Talk channel. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Strong Enough Pod. If you have suggestions for an upcoming episode or a future guest, please reach out at strongenoughpod@gmail.com. Remember, you are worth it.